right. Welcome back to the Integrateness Podcast with Jason and Jolene. I'm Jason. She's Jolene, the gal over there with the degree in helping people. Um, Last week, we talked about dealing with burnout. This week, we're actually going to talk about dealing with rejection. Probably the one thing as a species we suck at is being able to handle rejection. Nobody likes to be rejected in any capacity, be it for a job, a romantic interest, an invite to a friend's party. The ice cream that you want isn't there is even a form of rejection, and that can crush your day depending on what kind of day you're having and how much you really wanted that fucking ice cream. Rejection is something that's just it's a constant thing that we all have to deal with at some point in our lives, usually multiple times, and it's never easy, and we never seem to do it particularly well. Do we, Jolene?
Oh, my heart hurts, Jason.
Your heart hurts today, just in general, or just
Because of that word, the word brings about so many feelings. The majority of the people that I help in my practice have big rejection and abandonment wounds. I hold my hand up. Those are my deepest wounds. Rejection and abandonment. Those are the ones that I am continually called back to heal. Those are the ones, if I have triggers that come up in any kind of intimate relationships, and I mean intimate, just people I allow to get close to me, those are the ones that come up and get triggered the most, that I just heal over and over again. And I say over again because they're never the same ones, right? We let people in different ways. We learn to trust. People are different in how they respond and how we can nourish and heal based on whether they're healthy interactions or unhealthy interactions, right? The hardest thing sometimes in those healing of the wounds is like going from unhealthy connections with individuals into like your first healthy connection. And it's wild how uncomfortable and new all of that is, and how much rewiring that takes, which means there is a lot of healing that comes up around those issues. So that is why my heart hurts, because this one like cuts deep, which is like the human part of all of us. Like, I think if anyone listening were to think about where some of their most sensitive hurts are, it's usually around rejection. We have a core negative belief, often from childhood, that we are not good enough. And our brain is constantly looking for evidence of that in our lives. We are constantly sourcing where we are not good enough. It's wild what we put ourselves through.
You know what? And I'm exactly the same way. My big things are abandonment and rejection. And for me, I mean, I always kind of wondered why, and obviously discovering that I was adopted, that's a pretty big one. Like in terms of feeling a sense of abandonment or rejection, no matter what the reasoning was. So having that from a very young age, subconsciously, that was there. And then so it affected me all through, like, elementary school and then sort of high school in terms of like dating and all that. And then having your father die, sense of abandonment at a crucial time in your life, just compounded all those feelings. So yeah, this is a big one for me too, that I've struggled with. To the point I'm surprised that my wife and I are still together 15 years later, because there's always a part of me that is just like, well, every other shoe dropped. When's this one going to fucking drop? Right. I know it's not, but it's ingrained in my DNA to think about that, which is shitty after 15 years.
Yes, but you're aware of that. And she's probably aware of that wound. And one of the most beautiful things that partners can do for us is know that that's a wound of ours, and like learn what it is so they don't hurt us in the same ways. And I just think that that is like when we get into very conscious, healed relationships, or relationships where we're actively healing together, those are the kinds of things we want to learn about our partners. We want to learn their love language. We want to learn their attachment styles. I mean, people with strong rejection and abandonment wounds tend to have anxious attachment styles, or else avoidant, right? For myself, it's the anxious ones. Those are the ones that come up and like flare right the fuck up. And it's funny because if you looked through the majority of my marriage, for that 13 years, probably the last 10 years, I didn't feel as anxious in my connection, probably more avoidant. But like, if like, as I kind of stepped into, like, I say step, but really I was like dipping my toe into the idea of dating in this last year, I could totally see that it was like the previous versions of me. It was all anxious attachment stuff. And again, a rejection and abandonment being the primary wounds that would get, I would kind of stroked along the way, right? If we were to look at the definition of rejection, it's the act of rejecting something. So then I had to click on reject to get thanks, Merriam-Webster. So to refuse to accept, consider, submit to, take for some purpose, or use. To refuse to hear, receive, or admit. to refuse as lover or spouse.
Hmm.
So those are really difficult things, because when we think about who we are as a human being, this is really what's coming to me right now as I read those. When we think about who we are and we are offering ourselves to somebody in partnership, and again, this doesn't have to be romantic. This can be as an employee, as a friend, as a neighbor. We bring ourselves like a gift, right? I consider all of us a gift, and we are offering ourselves as a gift to somebody else. Imagine somebody like not putting their hands out and taking a gift you've given them, and you're like, but I made this for you, like I made this, I don't want it, right? That is essentially what rejection feels like to us when people are rejecting us as ourselves. And I've really come to lean into the statement, which goes with your calendar today, Jason. Rejection is protection. And I like pad the walls of my rejection womb, yeah, that too, with that statement, like rejection is protection, recognizing that when somebody or something is rejecting me, that's actually a form of protection and redirection, because maybe what I want isn't what's supposed to want me, right? But that being said, it hurts. There's so many things that come up. And often, though, what we have to remember is that it has more to do with the other person than it has to do with us. And I really wish we weren't wired to think the opposite of that. But as children, we can't think that we are not good enough. Or sorry, that other people have their stuff going on. We take it personally. We think there's something we could be doing differently to be accepted better, to be loved better, right? We don't want to think that our parents aren't capable of loving us the way we need to be loved. It must be because we're doing something wrong. So we create these cognitions and this belief system that just like becomes our internal software that we constantly have to override later. Jason, what's your anti-affirmation calendar today?
Oh, yes, it's a good one. Being hated and ignored by many makes life a lot more easier to handle. And which is funny because I have this, my son has inherited this thing from me where for some reason, despite our best efforts, we're likable and people want to be around us, but we're both quite introverted. So we don't want people around all the time, right? And so that's why I found this one kind of funny, because in some ways, boy, wouldn't it be easier to be hated and ignored? Because then you're not dealing with these commitments to all these people who want to be around you. But it also speaks to being rejected, and being rejected is not easier to handle in life at all. No matter how many, even when you tell yourself the whole bit, well, it's more about the other person. I was always told that, by my parents, well, if someone has a problem with you, it's more about them than you. But trying to process that, even as an adult, sometimes can just be like, but why? That doesn't make any sense, right?
And sometimes it's like, just because someone's not choosing you, it feels like rejection. It doesn't mean it's a negatively conceived kind of option. They're just not choosing you. It's not because they don't like you or you're not good enough. You're just not the choice that day. It's just like when we decide what to have for dinner, if we're choosing sushi over burgers, it's not because we don't like burgers. We're just choosing the sushi, right? But like, again, even sometimes the act of just not being chosen in certain situations or this or that, it feels like it's like this massive slap of rejection, right? And think about that in situations where people are applying for jobs and they don't get the job, they don't get the lead in the school play, or they don't get chosen for oh my God, fucking dodgeball, right? Everyone go back to dodgeball. How deep do your rejection wounds go? Let's go back to grade 3 PE class. Were you first, second, middle, or last during the dodgeball picking?
Because I was very unathletic, be it any sport, I was always picked last. Which probably led to my general dislike of sports. You know what I mean? Well, fuck you, sports. I'm going to just go do something else for a while. But I was not athletic. Like I would suck. I have a lack of depth perception. I could not hit a fucking baseball. I could do hockey, but I just athletically, in terms of like stamina as a kid, I just couldn't keep up on the ice. It was just one of those things. But boy, did that ever suck. I hated Pete.
And like, I don't really know. I don't even know if you get better at rejection as it goes on. Maybe you just let it impact you less, or you take it personally less, or you're able to like pick up and dust yourself off a little better. Like, you and I both had trying times in elementary school, things that set us apart. So for you, your dyslexia, and then of course moving schools and stuff. For me, there were periods like I was deathly shy at times, but then there were periods where I was overweight and I got bullied. And then like there was lots of rejection through those stages for us. So like you get used to it in a sense of like you learn how to navigate it. And I know people who never had to really deal with rejection because they were the athletic ones. They were, there was all of these things. And maybe rejection came later in life and that became a very bizarre or foreign thing for them to manage. But, for any of our listeners here, think about like, what are your earliest experiences with rejection? What does that look like? And where do you see those patterns play out? Like, I find for myself, some of the things I've learned through any rejection and abandonment issues is just double checking, triple checking constantly, like somebody else's behavior. How quickly am I likely to make that about me? Like, oh my gosh, is that because I said this? Or if I feel myself like wanting to go and make a repair about something, like, why am I assuming that that person's state is about what I may have said or done? And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. I've navigated this quite a bit over the last few months, just in connection of having maybe some healthy experiences communicating with people, and being able to say like, I'm wondering if this is something that's coming up in the situation, and I'm just like clarifying for the two of us and having healthy communication around this, or I'm actually trying to sort out or discern whether this is kind of my own wound and trigger. And it's about being like having safe places to go through that process, right? And sometimes I would be going through it on my own and it would still lack a bit of clarity, and I'm like, okay, I need to double check with this person, right? And it's so beautiful to be able to have those non-judgmental, open conversations where there's so much room for growth when the other person is mature enough to do that, right? But all too often, many of us have not had opportunities. I can't say I've had a ton of opportunities up until like my 40th year of life here to have those conversations. There's a lot of unhelpful conversations that have like pre-wired me through life. Even though I do this for work, doesn't mean I had those kind of connections in my life, right?
No, it's funny. It's like, I always wondered that with counselors. You know what I mean? Do they have all the answers to all the situations in their own lives? No, you're just a person like anyone else, and it's easier to apply things to other people than it is to apply things to ourselves.
In a sense, right? Or it's like I might have all of those skills, but if the other party involved isn't participating in those healthy ways, then you're in a negative cycle of it, right? Or whatever those things be, right? We talked about this in the previous episode. Like, you can set a boundary, but if somebody else isn't going to respect it, eventually you got to like pull out of that situation, right? Like, you can set as many boundaries as you want, and if people keep violating them, then the issue is the situation that you got to get out of, right? So it's kind of like that as well. So yeah, I mean, we're all learning as we go. It's no different than like a hockey coach, having really great coaching skills, but then maybe they are not that great on the ice. They also have, their own growth to do in their actual play on the ice, right? So yeah, no, and that's why I've tried to be pretty transparent about this journey. I'm open about my grief journey and how that's evolved, and obviously my separation I'm pretty transparent about in a lot of ways, of just like how one can kind of take these transformations in life and align with themselves more, to have more life satisfaction, honor self, use these as opportunities to heal. We're all just here to become better people. We're all here to, essentially expand ourselves into more peaceful places of growth, places of expansion, I guess, right?
I think when it comes to dealing with rejection and being able to have those conversations, right? It's tough when you feel invested in that person or that situation. That's what makes it, I think, the hardest part.
Yeah.
Even recently, I had to have a conversation with a friend of mine, a female friend, about a positive thing, but it was something I didn't know how she was going to take it. Right. And we're both happily married kind of thing, but you're sort of where you're opening up to someone, and it's like, you don't want them to take it the wrong way. So it took we meet for coffee, like every, a couple times a month kind of thing. It took a few meetings for coffee for me to even get that courage up. And this is someone I've known for almost 9 years. We have a very close relationship, but it was talking about something of importance that could lead to some form of rejection.
Yeah.
And that was terrifying. And I have 50 years experience doing this. You know what I mean? And it was still suddenly like, it wasn't asking anyone out for a date or anything like that. It was just talking about something that had some emotional meaning,
Yeah.
and could have maybe not been received so well.
But I also think that the things we're most afraid to do like that are often like that's our temperature gauge at how important that is to us, right? So the more fear we have of rejection doesn't always mean that the relationship's not safe, but it means that like this is important to me. I'm putting a lot on the line here. And then as we are able to engage in that kind of dialogue and have those moments of really like honest communication, then we can secure the safety of the connection. Like everything is in the repair. You know, I mentioned this in my Instagram stories a while ago when someone was like, oh, I lost my shit on my kids and spent the whole day repairing. And I was like, that is actually the definition of how we learn what relationships are safe, is by how we repair them. So essentially, you know, recognizing, oh my gosh, I was really fearful of this. It showed me that I did not want to lose this connection. But then because I was able to speak my truth, be authentic, say the hard thing, or bring up the hard conversation, even if I knew the other person might not agree or might take offense to it, I did it. And it was safe. That secures so much more in the connection there. And there's so many of us in so many relationships of our life where we're just not telling the truth because of those reasons. Like, we just don't tell our truth or the truth so much. Like, I really think if people inventoried the amount of things they held back on, and I'm not just talking about like, I'm not going to ruffle feathers, I'm going to be polite here. It's like big things that we're like, I'm just not going to say it. It damages so much of our relationships that they're not even true relationships anymore. They're not even true friendships. When we can get to those places, which I think we just do with a lot more personal awareness, a lot more growth, a lot more confidence, maybe maturity, whatever that looks like, it gets richer. Those connections are so much richer. But man, it takes a lot to get there because we fear rejection big time. We don't want to hurt people.
No, no, we don't. And so, but sometimes, like you're right, those hard things need to be discussed, and that has to be done. I have a friend who I've been friends with for 38 years, and it's getting to the point where it's time to have a real tough conversation about certain things because there's been a pattern over all those years where things were let go for
Yeah.
fear of, on my part, being younger, of rejection or hurting that person or them going and doing something really stupid because I tell them something. But it's getting to that tipping point where it's, you know what, this has been avoided for fucking too long and it needs to happen. And now it's a scary place to be in. But personally, I'm feeling a lot more comfortable to do it because I'm at the point where it's like, it's that, or it's like, goodbye. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
I feel like we all have to be okay letting things go and letting things end in order to get to that point. So that's also another piece we talked about last week around, being able to let go. And I think when we are okay whether something stays or goes is really where we're able to kind of lean in our truth a little bit more around that stuff. Yeah. And I mean, all too often when I have like taken the leap and been like, okay, I'm going to be this new, like truly authentic version of me. And I'm going to just like, no matter how insecure I feel here. And fuck, trust me, guys, like there's a lot of insecurity dipping my toe back into things, right? And it's like, I'm gonna do this. And if it's not received, then that's not the person I want to be in my life, because I'm not gonna go recreate the last 13 years of my life anymore, right? Like doing things different patterns, different things. And it will deepen and like progress that connection so much. It's really beautiful. And I watch my clients go through this all the time. And they're like, Jolene, you wouldn't believe it. I had that conversation and like that person met me and we just walked like 3 stairs up now. Like we are just, it like catapulted us into a whole new stage. And I was like, that in itself, right? And this is like, and so many of them, like even after things like infidelity and things like this, like where you can enhance connection by just being really truthful about what some of those things were. It's so beautiful. And I know it sounds so basic when we're talking about it, you guys, but you all know where you hold back. Like I know you do, or where you have held back until you've actively done this work. And in order to do this work, you got to go heal some deep shit. Like that stuff's coming up for me tenfold because it hasn't been awakened. It's been dormant for quite some time. That wound hasn't been tickled. And then when it does, you're like, oh, that is a gut punch. And you're like, okay, time for me to deal with that. Like there's no shame in it. There is no, well, shouldn't you be healed from that by now? And any of those kinds of things, right? You have to be able to like take it as it comes and recognize it's because nothing has had this special secret code to unlock this one yet. And here we are. So you just take it as it comes.
No, I think that's a great way to say it. right? And it's being okay with those things. And it's good for you for just being, you're going to go be your authentic self, because there's a lot of people who are never going to be their authentic self to people for fear of not finding that person. And then you find the wrong person.
Yeah. Well,
because
and
you weren't authentic.
that was my agreement to myself when I left my marriage, was that my only option is in life is to be 100% real, authentic. Like I have to, because I can't be in this anymore. And that was my agreement to myself. So I very transparently embark on that journey. And it's very interesting what I have endured. Like, again, it's been just dipping my toe in little ways, but like how you can be so upfront and so honest, and people can still be deceitful. And it's rather mind-blowing how, and for me, it's been about keeping an open heart regardless. And that's how I've always kind of lived my life, as I try to keep my heart as open as I can, even though it has been hurt many times in many different ways. That is why I'm here. Like, I have love to give and to share to humankind, and I don't want things to close and contract that. But it is very interesting to me how many people still take advantage of, or think that they can. Yeah, and it becomes just again, process of sometimes random learning, right? And it's like, is there anything I could have done differently? No, except for really just like, what do I do now that I know this, and move forward, right?
Awesome.
Yeah.
You could almost do like a side podcast, like Jolene's dating journey, and you could share
Oh
helpful tips
no.
to people. I kid.
And that's also a thing too, right? Like, Jason and I lead pretty public lives, and I try to share as much as I can, but there are parts of my life that are private, and I want them to stay private. And I actually think that's really beautiful when couples are able to just share something as like unique and intimate, and you can keep parts of you just separate and protected in some ways, you know? So for example, there was somebody and I remember them saying, they were like, no, I don't follow her business page, that's the work version of her. And I was like, fuck, I love that. Thank you for seeing me as somebody outside of this hat and this role. Because I think a lot of people, I don't want to say like fall in love with this version of me, but like they enjoy, they befriend this version of me. But this is also a hat career version of me, right? This is a different version. When you see me as a mom, when you see me as a woman, when you see me as a lover, I am a different person than you're seeing on this podcast or on my business page as a therapist, right? So I actually really respected that this person respected my professional identity and wanted to see me outside of that. I was like, thank you. You know?
That's cool.
Yeah, it was very cool.
Well, and it's the same thing. I only put so much out there, right? I keep a lot of my family stuff out of the public eye, except for like birthday pics or something like that. But yeah, no, it's important to have these boundaries.
Yeah, and to have protected parts of ourselves that are allowed to just be ourselves, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
And for other people to recognize that too, right? Like, everybody does this in their, well, I don't know if everybody does. A lot of people really throw everything out on social media, but I don't actually think it's everything. I really don't. I mean, it's really hard to get a full snapshot of somebody in that kind of a realm. Like, we are dynamic human beings. I don't think there's one way to capture us. You know, I think it's when we allow people into these intimate connections with ourselves and we navigate seeing people for who they are and loving them because of it, right? That we really then get to see people and we feel seen. And that takes human interaction. It takes pain. It takes ugliness. It takes vulnerability. And we just can't get that in social media levels of things, right? So I think that that's that protected private part of our world that puts us on the brink hugely of rejection, right? Because I think there's a lot of people that have like Instagram-y and, you know, social media type connections with people, and they feel like they're really deep and they're tight, but like, it's not really until you get to navigate wounds with another person, okay, when you get to have these hard conversations, or they evolve into conversations where people are like, I'm feeling uncomfortable with this connection, but I'm too afraid to say something. Fucking say it, because I promise you it'll either end the connection or it'll enhance it. And now you're looking at like what connection looks like, right? Now you're actually getting a sense of like what friendship can be, what partnership can be, what some of those things can be, because we can stay so superficial, not hitting those levels of intimacy by showing the uglies, showing the vulnerabilities of where I'm afraid you're thinking this, or I'm worried about that, or what are your thoughts on this? Like I was just talking to a client this morning who's been talking to somebody for a year on Instagram, doesn't really know where they sit in their life. And I was like, well, are you blocking yourself from finding a romantic partner because you've kind of got this like half-ass thing here? Like, does that stop you from dating or wanting to pursue someone else? And she was like, it's funny you say that, because I was thinking of asking this person, like, what is this connection to you? And I said, you have nothing to lose at this point for that, because you're either blocking availability for something else to come into your life or for you to pursue something else, but you're also sitting in this place of discomfort of not feeling good enough and not feeling chosen, when maybe that person doesn't even know being chosen is on the table. Like, do they know you want to be chosen? Do they know what your intentions are? So many of us are engaged in these semi-connections with people, but nobody knows what anybody's intentions are. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does.
And
It totally does. It totally does.
it's because of the fear of rejection. Like, it really comes down to
For
that.
sure. And people will stay in those weird distancy relationships or whatever, or relationships that aren't even healthy. And as a way to avoid being connected with people in the real world or dating someone in the real world. It's like, well, I've kind of got this going, because it's way easier to talk to someone through a computer than it is to go out and talk to people in the real world, because that can hurt real quick, whereas you can sort of lie your way through online connections in a certain way.
And maybe not even lie. Maybe they are very honest. And it's like the first place you feel like you can kind of do that. But then you can also, we actually protect ourselves from rejection in really bizarre ways. So we might choose long distance. We might choose relationships where if the other person doesn't choose us, we'll be like, oh, it's okay because, they lived how many hours away, or it's okay because they never wanted kids, or it's okay because, right? So we'll actually like create these scenarios where we're engaged in these situations where that if rejection comes, we're like, well, it kind of makes sense that, so subconsciously we're kind of creating these scenarios, if that kind of makes sense to people.
I think that's kind of what I meant.
Yeah.
In what I was saying, but yeah, like I'm having very little experience connecting with people that way, but yes, I think that's exactly true.
Yeah. So just, getting people thinking about where rejection holds you back in life, where fear of rejection holds you back, what some of your biggest rejections are. Like, Jason, for you, what were some of your biggest rejections throughout this lifespan for yourself that you've navigated?
In terms of moments of being rejected? Oh, there'd be like a few romantic rejections from like, early on. Never really any career ones. There was, and then I think just the whole adoption journey and figuring out what that was about. That was a huge one, right? And then of course dealing with a father. That was more abandonment than rejection, but the two go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And just not wanting to be rejected because of how much the pain of that abandonment was. So I would just not. But the way that I deal with that is I'd be in relationships that were unhealthy because I knew they'd end anyways.
Yeah, there you
that
go.
makes sense,
right? Yeah. Yeah. And for me, very similar, like rejection, friendship wise, back in my early days and stuff, I would say those were probably some big ones. And then romantic rejection, lots through just all of my dating journeys, crushes I had, like tons of rejection. I would say like the duration of my marriage, probably continually being rejected indirectly by like that person not choosing to prioritize the like state of the marriage, right? That indirectly then becomes consistent rejection, like choosing something else, or self needs over the needs of the relationship in a certain kind of way. So that was like perpetual. What else is there? My dad's death, of course, right? Being a suicide, there was very overt rejection feelings there, and abandonment, like big abandonment ones. And then, yeah, like I said, just dipping my toe into the dating world here, like really recognizing that is definitely one of the biggest wounds that I needed to heal in order to get into a healthy relationship, because that is kind of, it becomes the framework for a lot of reasons why one would tolerate behavior or not put a certain boundary in place or settle, right? Settling is kind of one of the biggest symptoms of rejection, right? And not asking for more and not speaking up for needs to be met in any of those kinds of things. So in order to have the kind of relationship I desire, that one's got to be healed, right? And then also because of massive trust issues, that's got to be another piece too, right? So it kind of fuels any sort of trust issues and stuff too. So I mean, they all kind of piggyback onto each other, but again, they become parts of the foundation of like the new empire being built, or like replace the foundation of the empire that's floating, kind of thing. So
good stuff on rejection. One of
yeah.
the toughest things to talk about. And we are just in time too, as the Zoom clock is ticking down for the last time on the Integrateness podcast. Is starting next episode, Jolene and I are recording everything together like we did in the Drunken Christmas episode. It will not be one Drunken Christmas episode after another, though. We promise you that.
Oh my God. You could have a summer solstice party or something.
Yeah.
Maybe something we talk about next time is the opposite of rejection, which is acceptance, right? The things that we lean into, the things that lean into us. Like, you know, when I say rejection, like I just feel all of this from my heart space, just like contracting and getting so activated as we talk about it. And I'm just like, it feels so different when you're on the other end of that. And it's just like acceptance and flow. So I think maybe we'll talk about that next time, you guys. And then we're probably rolling into Valentine's Day stuff, which is going to activate both of those things.
Big time. So until next week, I'm Jason.
I'm Jolene.
Talk again in 7 days.